Today, of course, we are going to be talking about upcoming LEED v5 and the updates around, and I would say the improvements around indoor air quality within LEED. So a really exciting topic. First of all, just to provide a quick introduction, of course, this webinar is being run by Kythera. At Kythera, we provide a complete air quality optimization platform. So that's leveraging hardware, so sensors and air quality monitors, software, and also a team of experts to help companies assess and really understand and ultimately improve their indoor air quality so that they can create better workplaces, better spaces for their occupants, improve occupant well-being, occupant health, occupant happiness, and ultimately employee retention and attraction. Of course, our solutions can be found in a lot of the world's most beautiful and iconic buildings, everything from the Empire State Building, the Burj Khalifa, and in just about every country across the world. Quick self-introduction. My name is Liam Bates. I'm CEO and co-founder at Kythera. My specialty is not so much on LEED. I'm personally more familiar with WELL. I'm on a couple of the advisory boards at WELL faculty, and as I said, I do not know a ton about LEED, which is why I'm super excited to be joined today by Sarah Goodman, who's the practice lead at Branch Pattern, and of course also the chair of the LEED tag for everything which is IAQ and IEQ. So with that, first of all, welcome, Sarah. Super excited to have you here. Anything that you want to say before we jump into the nitty-gritty?
I don't think so. I'm obviously really excited to be here, and hopefully that excitement about indoor environmental quality and air quality comes through in this presentation, but we have a lot to talk about. So I'd say let's just get going.
Awesome. And for those that don't know Sarah, I'm sure there will be a lot of people that are familiar with all the content that we see posting on LinkedIn. I see Sarah is also the unofficial expert on every IAQ sensor in the world. seems to have one air quality monitor from just about everywhere sitting.
Yeah. So if anyone on this webinar has any that I don't have yet, then look me up. Let's talk.
Awesome. So just some sort of formalities. Number one, this webinar is live. It is also going to be recorded, though. So if you do have to drop off before we wrap things up, there will be a recording that will be shared afterwards. This is going to take about an hour. We'll have time for questions at the end, probably 10-15 minutes of questions. And there's a chat. So if you want to have any sort of interaction, we're happy to have lots of discussion in the chat. At the same time, if you have questions, you can put those in the Q&A tab in Zoom. We'll collect all the questions, and at the end, we have some questions that were submitted beforehand, but we'll also take any live questions that come up during the session. And the agenda today, number one, we'll just have a quick overview of what is LEED. Then we'll go into all the fun stuff, which is what's new in LEED, and specifically LEED v5's improvements when it comes to IEQ and IAQ. We'll wrap things up with sort of some key considerations and looking at how you can do some of the math to sort of maximize both indoor air quality but also credits when it comes to IAQ, and then we'll move to the Q&A. With that, I will take a sip of water and then let's get into it. Okay, so first of all, just a very quick high level. I think LEED probably does not require very much introduction, but I will do it anyway. There's a number of building certifications around the world. I think LEED is really the most recognized, probably the most respected building certification program in the world. There are literally it's almost 12 billion square feet of certified space. There are huge quantities of square feet being added every single year. There's over 100,000 certified projects in almost every single country across the world. So LEED has a long history. It's really widely adopted. And what's different about LEED from a lot of other building certifications, there's a number of differences, but I think if you're sort of trying to simplify it down to one point, LEED's focus has really been on the environmental performance of buildings. historically a lot around energy efficiency, water conservation, material selection, but also indoor air quality. Whereas something like WELL, for example, is really much more focused on the wellness of the occupants in the space, as opposed to sort of the building itself. LEED provides a framework for building design as well as construction, but also operations and maintenance. There are a lot of different flavors of LEED, which I know I've always found to be a little bit confusing when we talk about LEED V whatever. You also have to look at sort of which version are we talking about within that? Are we talking about design and construction? Are we talking about operations and maintenance? There are many others, and it's important to know which one of those we're talking about. So I think Sarah's going to go into that in a lot more detail in her section. Of course, I think like any other building certification, I'm probably preaching to the converted here, but there's a lot of benefits to creating positive spaces, and there's a lot of positive outcomes to the certification, to the healthy building certifications, green building certifications. Obviously, number one, we're doing the right thing by the planet by creating buildings that are sustainable and have minimized impact on the world, but also it does have clear financial outcomes to those buildings in being able to increase valuations, being able to increase the rent from tenants, from creating spaces that are more positive and are really what I'd say in 2023 and going forwards, what tenants are looking for in a space. I think we're past the era of saying that a building can be a few walls of concrete with something on top that keeps the rain out. And really are in an era where the spaces that we occupy, when we're not working from home and we're going into an office, we want spaces that are amazing and create positive impact both for the planet as well for the people that are inside them. So where are we at today? 4.1 is the version of LEED that's been in use for the past few years. There's an IAQ subcategory within that. The way that you gain credits from this today is using a combination of an annual survey and an annual air test. And the air test is made up of just CO2 and TVOC. And the weighting of that is essentially the survey is 50%, whereas CO2 and TVOC is 50%. And that's a great starting point. And I think, obviously a few years ago when this was designed, that was already much better than what we did before because there's actually data. But as you're going to hear, we've got a lot further in LEED v5, and I think that's really exciting because there's obviously a lot of shortcomings to something like this. For those that are familiar with IAQ, you'll probably be scratching your head wondering, why CO2 and TVOC? Why not all these other things that really matter to our health, like PM 2.5? Certainly anybody that lives in a part of the world where there's wildfires, there's outdoor pollution, there's dust storms, will be wondering why PM 2.5 isn't listed here. And also, humans are great at measuring some things, but air quality isn't one of those. We're not very good sensors when it comes to knowing if the air is safe or not. And so there's definitely a place for occupant surveys and understanding how somebody feels. I'd say that's sort of more on kind of a thermal comfort aspect that makes a lot of sense. But really, when we're talking about our CO2 levels crazy high or acceptable, our PM 2.5 levels literally dangerous to our health, or are they really healthy? Unfortunately, humans just really don't do a very good job of that. We're very, very poor sensors. So that's obviously my view on this. As you can see, it's a slightly opinionated webinar. But I'm really excited because this has been totally changed in LEED v5. And of course, that's why we're all here. So I think at this point, I will hand it over to Sarah to talk about the next section and really go into LEED v5. I would just say that I think LEED is joining a lot of other great standards out there, moving towards continuous IAQ monitoring, continuous data, and really using performance-based metrics. So obviously, WELL v2, the WELL performance rating, these are all standards that use sensor data for submission to prove that a space is healthy for the occupants, rather than focusing on steps that have been taken to hopefully ensure that the space is good. And again, similar to Reset, which is the world's first sensor program, which is really based singularly on sensor data. And so it's exciting to see sort of LEED joining this collection of standards that are focused on, show me the real data to prove that the space is good, rather than just say that you have done X, Y, Z, and hopefully that leads to a better space. So all right, the part everyone's been waiting for, Sarah. I will stop sharing my screen, let you take over, and let's jump into everything.
Cool. Yeah, this is the part where I have to try to share my screen, but I don't see the screen sharing option. So
technology. There's no big green button at the bottom.
technology. There it is. Here we go. There we go. So you can't have a webinar without a technology issue, right? Okay. I think I'm sharing now here.
Yep.
Get my slides going. Okay. Well, I took some notes just as you were talking through that like 3-slide intro, because there's really a lot that we could talk about when it comes to LEED and rating system development and all the people and volunteer hours and time that goes into it. So even though I'm currently the chair of the technical advisory group for the EQ category, there are many more people just on that tag and involved with rating system development in a volunteer capacity. And then we have USGBC staff that we're working with. And then we have people like Liam who send me their questions for consideration. So I always appreciate that. And if there's any other feedback that people have, I think it's a really open and transparent process. So it's something that you can participate in a variety of ways. So I wanted to throw that out there too. All right. So what's new in LEED v5? This all started, years and years ago. It's a continuous development cycle, but you may recall, if you've been working in the industry for a while, we had a LEED way back. There were other versions, but there was a 2.2, and then there was a version 2009, which was kind of like a V3. Then there was a V4, then there was a 4.1, but it never really came out of beta, kind of. And now we're working on V5. So in 2022, we started talking about the future of LEED. And the mission of LEED hasn't changed, but it's evolved as a rating system over time, which is the goal, which is what we want. So these future of LEED principles were released in a document that is available online. I have a QR code at the end of this presentation that will link you to a lot of the things that I'm going to talk about. It's a relatively short document when we're talking about LEED documents. It's not like a full rating system, 500-page reference guide. It's a 22-page thing, and I'd advocate that everybody read it. But these were our marching orders for LEED committees as we looked to think about V5 and what we wanted it to address. And Liam pointed out an important distinction. We have rating system versions, so that's that designation of 4.1, version 4, version 5. But then we also have different rating systems, if it's operations and maintenance for existing buildings, or building design and construction, or interior design and construction for new buildings. So I'm going to talk about the differences between O&M and B, D, and C as well. But the time that I spend most of my volunteer efforts is in this middle category, this human health and well-being, which definitely aligns with the other things I'm personally interested in. Beyond air quality, I think making healthy buildings and healthy spaces for people is of the utmost importance, and that's emphasized on this page from the Future of LEED document. LEED is for the next generation, LEED is for the people in the buildings, and how do we invest in human health and well-being beyond just the EQ category, indoor environmental quality, but throughout the rating system, and looking at how people experience buildings differently with regard to mental health and physical health. So there was a lot of cues that we look to in LEED development in other rating systems like WELL, and bringing those back into LEED and try to recognize the alignment, and also consider how projects and teams will use the rating system if they do dual certifications or crosswalks and different pathways like that as well. So when we talk about LEED development, this is actually a graphic that I drew for myself when I first joined the tag back in 2019, I think. There are a lot of committees that work to develop the rating system language with a lot of intentionality, even before it gets released for a beta version or public comment. So there is the LEED steering committee, and this graphic is actually a little bit outdated because in 2023, earlier this year, some new working groups and consensus committees started being ingrained into this process. But largely, we have the 6 TAG, the technical advisory groups, and they're aligned with the different credit categories of LEED. So water, energy, environmental quality, materials, sites, and location and planning, not transportation. So the chair of each of those tags then occupies a seat on now the LEED steering committee. And then there are additional representation on that committee from these working groups. So we have LEED for cities, an equity working group, and a resilience working group. And then there are the consensus committees for design and construction in existing buildings, which were formed to help expedite this development and get LEED on what's going to be a 5-year development cycle, similarly to an ASHRAE standard or a code cycle. So 2023 at Greenbuild, this operations and maintenance existing buildings V5 version was launched. And I'll have a link to this too. So there's this language is out there. This is what I think got Liam initially really excited, and he had a lot of great blog content come out immediately on that. I think we were still at Greenbuild, and I was like, "Whoa, he's already publishing things." So that was good. And then there's a beta program that projects had to apply to participate in. It's for new projects that have never been certified before, so not for recertifications, which for existing buildings, 4.1, I think the biggest evolution there was that it was a major improvement to a recertification process for an existing building that had previously been LEED certified under building design and construction, for example. So that beta program is going to extend all the way through 2024, and applications for that closed mid-November, and the projects are supposed to be notified, I think, end of this month. So we'll know what projects are participating in that beta, because all this is about getting continuous feedback for development of the rating system. So over other milestones we have coming up in 2024, the design and construction language as a draft will be released, and that's targeting Q1. So it's a pretty big window there, but Q1 2024 is when that language will be released to the public. I'm going to give a little preview here during this webinar with the major caveat that it is very much in flux still. We were talking in preparation for this webinar, and I told the Kytera team that we had a tag call yesterday in which we talked for like an hour and a half and got to a point where it was like, well, can we change the way, what are all these credits are named or how this whole category is structured? And it was like, maybe, yeah, we could still. So anything I talk about today in terms of building design and construction rating system, just know that it could change. So then once that's released, Q1, there'll be feedback and public comment period. And then the O&M beta, as I said, will run all the way through Q4 of 2024. So there'll be some more announcements at Greenbuild this coming year. So keep an eye out for that in terms of development of V5, and then it will be launched 2025 as a validated rating system. So after we go through draft language, public comment, there'll be a vote of all the USGBC member organizations to get it validated and move to an actual rating system. Then we'll be on that 5-year cycle. So the next big release, which I assume will be called V6, will be in 2030, and that's at that point. Okay, and system goals for LEED. This was another outcome of our future of LEED conversations. So climate action, quality of life, and ecology were kind of the main 3 big categories, and you can see the weightings that we're applying to those at the bottom. Again, the points are still in flux. We're actively talking about this rating system development, but the total quantity of points is not going to change. It's still going to be like the same points going from version to version. Just the weighting and the emphasis are probably going to evolve a little bit because the industry is evolving, the world is changing, the work that we do and the things that are important to us as people are also changing constantly. So thinking about climate action, quality of life, and ecological conservation and restoration. Go to this next slide, which this was presented at Greenbuild as well. So these are also the themes that are associated with those 3 main goals. And a little preview at some of the ways that we're thinking about crafting this rating system and weaving these concepts into all the categories. I know there's a lot here on this slide, but the main point that I wanted to emphasize was that health and well-being column in the middle, there's a lot of talk going on right now about air quality, water quality, health in buildings and people, and all of the things that was a huge feedback that we heard as part of the future of LEED conversations and committee work. It's all in there. It's going to be in there, I think. I'm excited about how it's taking shape. So in that health and well-being category, I said a little bit of this before. We want to promote safe and healthy spaces and emphasize physical, mental, and behavioral well-being for all occupants in the buildings, all people. And these are the three main ways that we're going to get there. So looking at quality air, both during regular operations and adverse conditions like pandemics or wildfires or other outdoor ambient events, but also indoor events that could change the indoor air quality of a building. Understanding and accommodating project-specific occupant needs. So encouraging teams to consider the needs of occupants beyond just right now, but into the future, and looking at the resiliency and adaptability of our indoor spaces going forward. And then 3, integrating health and well-being co-benefits alongside environmental considerations. If you recall from your LEED AP exam, the original acronym for LEED was Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. And we had a conversation at one point about what other things should or could those E's stand for in terms of like environment or ecology or indoor environment, because it's really evolved from just an environmental focus to a people focus in the rating system. It's always been in there. We're just going to talk about it more now. So specifically in LEED V5, and we're going to get into improvements to indoor environmental quality at a light level, and then focus pretty heavily on the indoor air quality. So here's how we get there again at a little bit different level within our category for O&M, the existing buildings beta version, which is out now, looking at natural systems. So beyond the credits that have always been in there, like daylight and views, we're thinking about things like biophilic design and increasing the access to daylight and views, and just restructuring of some of those fundamental credits that have been in the rating system for a long time, but have maybe become a little bit more commonplace or easier to do. Looking at increasing physical health and considering mental diversity as well inside buildings. Okay, so here is the current status of V5 O&M existing buildings summarized in a table. And then note, this is the beta version. So this is the language that you can go to now, download the PDF, read through beyond just the EQ category, all the languages in there. And there's a high level summary at the left side column on what we're considering. What I have slides today on the 2 bolded rows. So we're going to talk about the verification of ventilation and filtration prerequisite and the indoor air quality performance credit, which is that big 13-point credit right now. And I also wanted to, touch on the 4.1 development and the recertification process for that, because if you're not familiar with ARC and using the performance pathway to certification or recertification, I think it was a huge jump for LEED. Anyone that remembers pursuing an existing building certification before this data-driven approach was an option might remember that it just felt like millions of policies and a lot of process and not as much action, perhaps. And so that was really the goal here, is to streamline the certification, make it all really actionable, and increase people's knowledge of what's going on inside their buildings, really at a fundamental level. So the other credits that we're not going to talk about, this occupant needs assessment is kind of a newer thing, and we got some feedback on this one and the occupant satisfaction survey specifically at Greenbuild. So if people have a chance to look at that language and want to chat with me about it, I'd love to talk to you about it. You'll notice the points under occupant satisfaction survey are kind of high, maybe compared to others, but I think thinking back to the fact that we're building buildings for people and we want to increase health and wellness and satisfaction in spaces, that was why we initially had weighted it at that level. green cleaning, now we have a policy is a requirement, and there's some additional features that you can pursue as a credit. And then environmental tobacco smoke control, that's again one of those things that's always been in the rating system and is in this one as well. But you'll see the evolution of language when I get to the slide. I have a similar slide on BD and C on V5. And then integrated pest management also is in here as a credit. Okay, so this one prerequisite I want to do a little bit of a deep dive on is the ventilation and filtration verification prerequisite. And there's three main parts here. The intent of this prereq is to really understand the amount of outdoor air being delivered to the space by the ventilation systems, understand how the exhaust is performing and filtration within the building, and then to compare to standards that exist for indoor air quality. So the current facility requirements operations maintenance manual has to have preventive maintenance information from ASHRAE standard 62.1 2022 or later version, remembering that LEED is going to be on a 5-year cycle and ASHRAE standards are revised every 3 years approximately. So in theory, if you wanted to comply with a newer ASHRAE standard under V5, you could do that. And then there's a tie-in to this EA prerequisite, so different category, energy and carbon policy management. So there's in version 5, you'll see in both BD and C and O&M, there's kind of this interest in simplifying even the amount of policies that we have to have teams produce and making sure there's some coordination across the different categories of the rating system. Okay, and then outdoor air investigation. This is something I personally feel pretty passionate about. It's always, again, been in the rating system, but it was largely a checkbox on a form where somebody just said, yeah, we comply with section 4 of 62.1. Now we're trying to be a little bit more prescriptive and intentional about what that means. So teams will have to investigate local and regional air quality and demonstrate that that is happening in some way beyond just a checkbox. And then at a more specific level, observe the site air quality at the building, because even beyond regional air quality monitors or somewhat local, like there can be specific instances at a building like idling vehicles or your proximity to additional processes nearby or other locations that are important. And then assessing the existing system. There are many things that can be wrong with existing building ventilation systems. So it's a kind of a multi-step process. First, there's doing a ventilation calculation per ventilation rate procedure on what should the building be delivering in terms of outdoor air, though you can do a simplified calculation procedure as well. Then there's measurement of outside air coming into the building and comparison of those two things. So how much air should we have? How much air do we have? Why or why not? Are those the same? Looking at what types of filtration are currently going on in the building, checking economizers. That's a big one, making sure economizers are functioning as intended. So it's a little bit of a, light commissioning light version there. And then if the building has natural ventilation, checking the openings and looking at overall exhaust system performance. So that's kind of a lot as a prerequisite. I recognize that, but I think most all of us or all of us on this webinar acknowledge and appreciate the importance of ventilation and outdoor air. Okay, so the IAQ performance credit, this is that 13-point credit, has a couple of different options. And please understand, we went back and forth on this language a lot of times. So when you read through it and you're like, option 1, path 1B, 1A, 2, like I get it, like there's a lot, it's really complicated. So also comments on streamlining language are always appreciated. And I'm gonna quickly kind of go through these 2 slides and then we'll come back to this one. So just understand with this credit, there's those 13 points, and it's a little bit of a grab bag of what you want to do and what the project is capable of. So there's option 1 of measuring indoor air, and then there's option 2, ventilation and filtration standards. You can get up to 6 points there, and option 3 is strategies to improve air quality, 1 to 4 points. So you'll notice like the math doesn't exactly add up because there's options underneath these. So back to option 1, this is kind of the big one, with all these paths below it of monitoring indoor air. So the table at left has different points, thresholds. Again, there's an asterisk here, these are not final. But if you're doing continuous indoor air quality monitoring under option 1, path A, you have to pick at least one parameter to monitor. And knowing that most commercial grade air quality monitors do multiple of these things, it doesn't seem like that's too heavy a lift to do at least one component. Uh, then the monitor has to have data for 4 consecutive months at 1 hour intervals, 15 minutes for CO2, because that's more variable. And they have to be building grade or better. And right now, the way we have that defined is either reset grade B or UL 2905. Under path 1B, and these are kind of written in parallel on the two paths, you have to meet specific thresholds of those contaminants that you're monitoring. So path 1 is very literally just like monitor this stuff and show us the data that you're doing it. And we're trying to incentivize teams. We have a lot of conversations on the tag about, is this strict enough? Are we making people do enough stuff? Like if the outcome is really to drive forward health and wellness in buildings. But then on the flip side, we have to think about like, what are most buildings doing now in terms of continuous monitoring? And it's largely not a lot. So we're trying to incentivize projects to like do something, like do more. And I get that it's not ideal or perfect, but projects that want to be ideal or perfect, they can do more. We're not restricting that. We're just not trying to raise the bar so much that projects just won't even pursue LEED or won't even try monitoring because it seems too complicated. So path 1B is to do path 1A and report daily values that are showing compliance with like a minimum good level of performance for air quality limits. All right, and then path 2 is the point in time air quality testing. And I think these are really complementary paths. Air quality testing for LEED has been part of the rating system again for a really long time. There's a great parallel to like well performance testing in that rating system. They happen at different times too. So I think all of this really works together ideally in so that you're doing LEED IAQ testing after construction and before occupancy. Then you have continuous monitors in the project that are designed into the new construction, let's say. Those are monitoring. And then you're doing well performance testing after the project is finished and people are in the building. So the LEED IAQ testing can kind of inform these things that you're going to see after construction and after occupancy. And they all are intended to work together. So people, I think a lot of times get bogged down in like, should we do the testing or the monitoring? And I would say that it's not like an either or option. I think you should probably do both if you care about air quality because you're getting different answers from those different things. So that's path 2 is one-time air testing. And again, it's like just do the testing, you can get a point there. And if you do the testing and meet certain performance thresholds, you can get more points. Okay, option 1. So then moving on to option 2, ventilation and filtration standards for the building. There's a path 1 and path 2 here. Ventilation is meeting ASHRAE 62.1. That's great. You can get a point. And then if you have increased ventilation, think back to the prerequisite and we're doing the calculation and the measurement. And this is where you're rewarded with points if you're doing better than the minimum. And then path 2 is MERV 13 filtration. I know I personally had a lot of conversations about recirculated air and MERV 13 filtration during COVID because a lot of LEED projects did have the capability to do enhanced filtration, a MERV 13 versus like a MERV 8 on their outdoor air, but not a lot of projects or systems were capable of doing MERV 13 filtration. This is kind of excluding the conversation on different filter pressure drops, but for recirculated air, a lot of systems aren't set up to do that level of filtration on all of the air in the building. So we're trying to think about incentivizing projects to think about that more and be capable of recirculating air with a MERV 13 filtration level. And option 3 here is all the stuff in the table at the left. So if you do some amount of these things, you are rewarded with points. And this is something that we continue to talk about and think about in the context of BD and C, because there are things that are resilience concepts in this table that are in that rating system. So this episodic outdoor ambient conditions, things like filter change notifications are somewhat standard. These entryway systems, like these will seem familiar to people, and then actually doing the maintenance and demonstrating the maintenance. But Infection risk management is another item that is new. And then this outdoor air quality monitoring item is a new feature that we continue to talk about, and that will evolve really as the technology evolves and changes. When we started talking about this rating system, a lot of the products that are on the market today did not even exist yet. So that's why this is kind of constantly evolving in real time as we're having tag meetings and conversations and rating system development discussions. Okay, next section, we're going to talk BD and C. So within this category, priorities here are the same. Then this is the kind of the buckets that we are working to fit the credits underneath. So climate and health, natural systems, physical and mental diversity. And here is that table I promised on the equivalent BD and C. Originally I had some points here, and then after our tag meeting yesterday, I just deleted all the points because I was like, I don't even know, like we don't want to get bogged down in points, because that admittedly that happens to us. And my role as the chair of the committee, there's 16 other people now on the committee, and I feel like it's largely as a facilitator, because there's a lot of really great expertise, and people have different knowledge levels of their certain areas of expertise and of the rating systems and the history of LEED and the development that we've done so far. So largely these conversations can become really big and complicated. And I look at my role as like making sure everybody gets their opinions in, and we're considering all the potential implications for projects, and then bringing it back to like, we are trying to develop a rating system that a whole broad array of people and projects can use. So this is just where we are at currently. The name, this is a draft. This is not like out there in the world at all yet. So take this all with a huge qualifier that it probably will change. It probably definitely will change. And I don't know what exactly will change in it. But again, these three bolded rows are what I'm going to talk about here in a little bit more specificity to finish out this presentation. Air quality, occupant needs assessment, and again, even these names, we're talking about the names, they're changing too. And then air quality monitoring is another big one here. So totally, currently we have 13 points here in the BD and C category to get essentially all of these bottom rows done. There are 4 prerequisites at the top. The occupant needs assessment is something that will be new and interesting to talk about more. Certainly, it's going to change. I'll just keep saying that it's going to change over and over again, and then that'll be the rest of this presentation. But when the actual language comes out, the draft language comes out, it'll be really interesting to get feedback on that one. Okay, so prerequisite for air quality in BD and C. The intent here is to design for above average indoor air quality with features to control things like PM 2.5 to support occupant health and well-being. So again, the emphasis on outdoor air quality investigation is much more prescriptive now. We're not just saying, check the checkbox that says you comply with section 4 of 62.1, but we're actually saying, go outside. It's a lot of the language from 62.1 actually, but it's like, go to the site, do these things, document it in a report, which then you'll probably have to submit as part of your LEED documentation to GBCI for a review. There is allowance for the ventilation rate procedure, so more prescriptive ventilation calculation, but also the indoor air quality procedure or natural ventilation procedure. So all those calculation methodologies will be allowed under this prerequisite. And right now, the way it's written is that we are talking about MERV 13 filtration for outside air and recirculated air. So just having the capability that if there were to be another global pandemic, you could get those MERV 13 filters in for recirculated air in your HVAC systems. Some things specifically we're still discussing. Should we continue to require outdoor airflow monitors at a prerequisite level or move it to a credit? Because at one point we were thinking projects should have outdoor air monitors. And again, just to increase awareness, to get the data going. But now we're talking about maybe moving it into a credit more specifically. The occupant needs assessment is intended to develop a health action plan using information from the resilience and equity prerequisites to outline pressing indoor environmental quality concerns. So beyond space planning that we do at a fundamental level for architectural design, thinking about the actual occupants in the building that you will have, and like what needs might they have, and how would we design those spaces differently. Looking at acoustics. So this is one of my favorite comparisons to well, where you have to come up with an adjacency plan. Is this a loud zone? Is this a quiet zone? If they're next to each other, let's talk about how do we mitigate that. There's also a thermal plan as part of this, and then looking at accessibility criteria beyond just basic ADA requirements, things like universal design and inclusive design, and how do we make our spaces and buildings better for people. Still discussing like requiring teams to go through this process and coming up with an action plan and a policy. Does this move from single like reactive acts of fixing things to a more proactive approach to health promotion? Like, is this the best way to do that? Because that's really the intent and the goal of this prerequisite. How do we best build in those actions? And then what do we require teams to show us that to prove that they're doing these things? And how do we organize it? Like indoor environmental quality factors of, thermal comfort, acoustic comfort, lighting comfort, like, or are there more things that we need to consider outside of that? So this is a big one, and I would love to talk to more people about it. Okay, air quality monitoring, and we're just going to wrap up here. This is our second to last slide. So right now in BD&C, you have 2 tiers, and this is a huge topic of conversation at our tag call yesterday. So definitely will change. But right now we have 2 tiers of what are we monitoring inside. So again, the second bullet's easier to talk about. We have a building grade or better requirement for performance. We don't have clear guidance yet on how many monitors and what's the density of where they will go. Obviously, they need to go in the breathing zone. But beyond that, it's like, what is the right number per building? And I think Liam and I are going to chat about that maybe a little bit more here during the Q&A. There's a baseline air testing requirement, like I talked about before. I think those things work together really well, because I think ideally what you're doing is you're doing a point in time test, then you're monitoring. Maybe you see some things on the monitoring data that you want to know more about, then you're doing more testing if you really care about continuous performance and air quality in your building. And still discussing, do we need more points, or how do we allocate the points for people that want to do indoor, outdoor, and baseline testing? And if you are controlling your building in some way to react to these things, and looking at outdoor air and indoor air and designing for indoor air quality procedure, and almost doing like a outside air economizer based on your air quality outside around the building, which I think would be something interesting to consider. And then this sent us down a real tangent. Do we include testing in the credit title? And because right now it's just called air quality monitoring. So it was like, yeah, we should do testing. And then it's like, what's the difference between testing and monitoring? And what do we mean when we use these words? And I love these conversations, because it's just really like expansive. And then we have to come down to like, okay, but we need to write this down in a way that somebody's going to know what we mean. And then how many parameters should we require teams to include per point? And like, what are those parameters? Because again, there are things that monitors can do now that they couldn't do a year ago or 2 years ago. And how do we write this in a way that it's going to incentivize teams now to do things they're not doing, but then also be applicable in 2 or 3 years? So, okay, there's that QR code I promised. I'm not 100% sure where I left this Google Doc, but that should go to a Google Doc, which has at least some links to some stuff I talked about. And this is just a summary slide on branch pattern. I didn't talk about us as a company, but we do all these things. So while I'm a huge nerd for air quality, obviously, I'm interested in all of these topics and would be happy to talk to anyone about anything at any time, really.
Awesome. So much information. That was great. I just want to say, first of all, and we still have a few slides here, and then we got a lot of questions to go through. So we'll try to do that. I just want to say that was really insightful, and also just say massive props, because I've also been looking at the number of participants in the webinar, and we haven't had like a single person drop off throughout this time. So
oh, good.
Yeah. Clearly the content is resonating, and everybody has a lot of questions around this. So I'll just wrap up with a couple sort of final slides before we get into the Q&A. So just the unfortunate reality is that poor air quality is here to stay. This is a slide that I stole from a presentation we did with LinkedIn at and SOM at Greenbuild. So thank you, LinkedIn. A lot of poor air quality is here to stay. It's coming up, more and more in the news. More and more awareness around this, be it PM or all of the other pollutants that we have to deal with. So this is the reality of the world that we live in, unfortunately. The good news is, of course, there's a lot of things that we can do about it, as you were just describing. And other than the health impacts, I probably don't need to tell everybody on this call about the positive impacts of IAQ on productivity. There's a wealth of research and scientific studies showing the benefit of clean air on productivity and our cognitive performance, as well as our long-term health and well-being. This is just, I really want to share this because this is one of those charts that every time I look at it, I'm just like, whoa, this is crazy. And for those that haven't seen this, feel free to screenshot it. If you ever need to convince somebody of the importance of having good air quality, not just on the health and well-being of occupants, but on decisions that they make. You can see here, if you look at the leftmost column, for example, as CO2 goes from 600 ppm up to 2500 ppm, people's decision-making ability goes from sort of the 97th percentile down to the 30th percentile. So that's a pretty massive drop. So again, the benefits of having clean air on all aspects of how we perform as humans are really well documented, which is, of course, why I believe so much, and I'm always talking about the importance of continuous monitoring, why I'm so happy to see that it has a place in LEED v5. Continuous monitoring, as opposed to sort of what we've historically done. And Sarah, I love that you talk about sort of how spot testing or one-time testing and continuous monitoring can coexist and provide like more data on top of each other to help people really understand what's going on and make sure that they have an amazing space. Having that wealth of information that comes from having so many data points lets you understand when something goes wrong, when it goes wrong, and not 11 months after it went wrong, which is, of course, something that we want to avoid. So you can identify trends, you can find problems, you can see across your entire portfolio of buildings. If you're a large corporate, for example, what is going on across in every region of the world, which buildings perform, which ones don't, new buildings versus old buildings. Every building is unique. And it's having data allows you to understand how they actually perform and where they're different. And of course, having continuous data, and you talk about this with economizers and so on, there's so much potential for us to use this data to actually have a better impact on the planet and drive towards energy savings as well. So my takeaway when I went through the beta version that was published and then from what you were just talking about, I tried to simplify this into sort of if I was running a building, what would I do? And it's like, number one, measure indoor air quality, then meet the IAQ thresholds, which I think have been really well designed, and basically meet 62.1 and then put in MERV 13 filters, which is probably what we should all be doing anyway. And if you just do these things, which in my opinion are basically sort of common sense for having a good indoor environment, then you've got your 13 points and you sort of max out this credit. So this is sort of the formula that I created to look at this and be like, yep, monitor, hit the targets, do the things that you should be doing anyway, and you're good. So here's the one slide cheat sheet. And actually for we made a simple calculator, because I know that when I went through the option 1, path B, sort of A2, it took a few times of reading through it because there's so many different ways that you can sort of achieve the credits, which is a great thing, by the way, because it's really flexible. There's a few different ways that you can achieve the credits, and it takes a little bit of understanding to work out like what sort of the final score would be. So here at Kytera, we built a calculator that you can just choose, here are the things that I'm doing, and these are the credits that I will get, which I think has been really helpful. So just as a thank you for everyone that's joining today, before we jump into the Q&A, we will also be sending a link to this IEQ credit calculator. So anybody that wants to understand maybe based on the performance of their buildings that they have today, or according to the design guidelines that they have internally within their own company. If you do these things, what are you going to be getting in terms of LEED v5 IAQ credits? Again, with the caveat that this is in beta and everything could change. Okay, so we're into the Q&A. I know we don't have much time, so we may go a little bit over time if people are able to stay on. Here are some of the questions that we received beforehand. We've got quite a few in the live section as well. Sarah, question for you. What does this mean?
Yeah, I think I answered this, hopefully. I know we solicited some of these questions before the webinar, so these aren't the ones that are coming in live now, which I'm also looking at. But in draft means the rating system language could change. It's out for public consumption and review and feedback. But before we do that finalization and voting from USGBC members, the easy answer to this is yes, you can use it now if you were one of those projects that applied and is approved to participate in the beta program over this next year. Otherwise, you will have to wait.
Awesome. How will this LEED v5 update impact the process for contractors? Any
What do you
comments?
think? Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, if we're talking about B, D, and C, right? New construction versus existing buildings, because existing building LEED certifications, there might be active construction going on or not. There are certainly policies that we want to address if there are renovations or things going on in existing buildings. Incrementally, I guess, certainly within my category, I can speak to, it doesn't feel like a huge change from version 4 to version 5 overall for contractors in terms of indoor environmental quality. The main things that were part of EQ before were like construction indoor air quality management plan. That was never a huge heavy lift for people, I felt like, that wanted to comply during construction. They were already doing a lot of the right things or the things that we prescribed. That's not really changing fundamentally. And then the other kind of big piece that I presented some of this content internally, and one of my team leads pointed this out. So thanks, Andres, if you're still on this call, was that the low emitting materials credit is migrating out of the EQ category and into the materials category, which made a lot of sense to me. So that was kind of the other heavy lift I saw for contractors. Ideally, it's being handled on the design team side as part of design and specifications, but that kind of became a big thing for contractors. And it is certainly important for health during construction as well, but that's kind of not being developed by ITAG anymore. So there'll be some changes there.
This is interesting. Is there a crosswalk between reset? I think we heard a little bit about this, with in terms of sort of the requirements for monitors, but anything to add on to this one?
Yeah, I think the requirements for monitors is interesting because, I mean, even the way we have the outdoor air monitor requirement, performance requirement written, and there will be like specific accuracy and calibration requirements too in the final rating system language, but we had written that outdoor monitors have to be reset grade B or equivalent, but reset doesn't grade outdoor monitors currently. So there's a little bit of a gap there that we have to figure out. But specifically in terms of a crosswalk, like if your building is pursuing a reset certification and a LEED certification, that was something that we talked about. Like, should we just give people points if they are reset or if they're pursuing that? So it's in development still, I would say. It's something that we're considering.
Work in progress. Yeah. I mean,
Work in progress.
I can see a lot of logic
TBD.
to that. Yeah, if you've got real-time data and you're compliant with reset, I mean, I think I've looked at the thresholds and they're pretty similar, if not the same.
Yeah, it was definitely a resource that we looked at and people we talked to too as part of this development. So that was one of the main goals from Future of LEED was simplifying the rating system and process whenever we can. And so if there's existing things that already exist that seem to meet the same goals, then I don't think anyone's opposed to using them or developing those crosswalks.
Yeah. Maybe we'll I think there's a couple questions that kind of were sort of together here, and I've seen people ask them in the chat as well. Are there, and you touched upon it briefly here, but are there requirements around accuracy, range, resolution, and maybe tied to that as we think about actually deploying monitors? what is how many do you need to deploy?
I know. That's a really great question. And I don't have a great answer for it, unfortunately. But we've talked about it certainly, and I know we've looked at like the well requirements for accuracy, range, and resolution. There's maybe you want to talk about those from your work with IWBI, but I think there's evolving guidance on what those should be. But yes, we will have requirements for those in the rating system. And some other things we've talked about in terms of placement of monitors in the breathing zone, right? Because we want to know like the air quality of the air that people are breathing. There are things like per occupancy type, or per 5,000 square feet, or per floor, like those kinds of things. But then we also need to write the system in such a way that it can be applicable for performing arts center, or an office building, or a school, or a data center. So it's like you want to be really prescriptive to give people guidance, but
Mhm.
you also can't be too prescriptive, because then you'll end up in instances that don't make sense with too many monitors, or monitoring in areas that you're not getting valuable data from.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's, we're working on it.
Makes sense. And what, I guess, just the question that probably a lot of people have is tied to this, when there are a few things that are sort of in flux, work in progress. What's the timeline where people should expect to be able to sort of gain clarity on some of these things?
Well, when we put out the Q1 version of this new construction BD&C rating system, I don't know exactly what it will look like, but I assume it will be in the same kind of format as the O&M language is out there now. So if you go and download that PDF, look at the O&M language, it's essentially that first page of the full rating system language. So this is not going to be like a 500-page document for review. It's like, this is the intent. These are the general requirements. And I don't, I don't think, I don't know if this will be answered. Certainly not like accuracy, range, and resolution. Like that will not be in this Q1 version. There might be a little bit more guidance on, um, and I'm really just peeking into the future here and totally guessing, but there might be some guidance on like, for these types of buildings, here's a general rule of thumb with how many monitors you're going to need to have, like that kind of thing, so people can start to react to it. And I found that that's some way, the best way to do these things is like put something out there and then let's get some feedback and reaction to it, instead of just like leaving it really broad, because then you're just going to end up with a lot of questions, and
Yeah,
those
yeah,
questions aren't going to help you like feedback into what it needs to be and change. Yeah.
absolutely. Makes sense. I guess just a quick question, Sarah. Do you have a time if we go a few minutes over?
No, I'm good. Yeah, I'm good.
Okay. I think we can move to some of the live questions then. So that would be great. Maybe I'll put one of, so we got one question that's come up here. What is the idea behind monitoring only for 4 consecutive months at 1 hour intervals?
Yeah, that's a great question. And again, this is one of those examples of things that we talk about and say like, well, that's not enough. Like that's not good enough to really make an impact. But at the same time, looking and considering the history and the context of 4.1, where you just had to submit like essentially one data point over the course of a year, like we're evolving. And this is something that we have to kind of remind ourselves when we're developing these rating systems. Like what does kind of good look like now, or maybe even not good? What's the baseline now? What is like the ideal that we want to get to? And then what is that gap in between, and how do we address it? And it's not going to always be feasible to write the rating system language in a way that we're going to jump all the way to like the ideal or the good. So from what I recall, the 4 months at a 1 hour interval was kind of a compromise language, like recognizing that it's not really what most monitors do. It's not really the way that you would probably run the building. It's just to say like this is what we want you to do at a minimum, kind of thing.
Yeah, and well, and I guess, again, to that, I think massive props. It is a huge leap forward from where we were at. So
Yeah,
yeah,
we're getting better.
definitely. All right, we've got one here. It says, with LEED V5 having a greater emphasis on monitoring and testing, how long after construction and occupancy is a building anticipated to receive the rating?
Yes. One of my favorite answers. I'll give one of my favorite answers here. It depends. I guess I read this question, and it depends on if we're talking about O&M or BD and C, right?
Mhm.
So if we're talking about BD and C, I assume, how long after construction and occupancy is a building anticipated to receive a rating? There's already a delay associated with that based on the construction documentation that you have to compile and collect and submit. And that could be, I mean, it's totally dependent on your design and construction teams and your lead administrator, but right. So it could be 6 months, it could be a year, it could be multiple years. So if we're talking about continuous monitoring and proving performance, thinking about those different pathways. So like you put in monitors, great, you get some points. Your monitor data is good, great, you get some more points. That's maybe another reason, and this language is not in the rating system yet, but that's maybe another reason why we're saying show us 4 months of data and not 12 months of data, because in a BD and C certification, that would delay the ultimate certification if we're making teams wait for 12 months of data before they submit.
That makes a lot of sense. Awesome. Let's see, what do we have next? Why is LEED V5 tending towards, I guess, removing outdoor airflow monitors? I think that's something you mentioned.
Yeah. I think what I said there is that we originally had outdoor air monitoring written into one of the prerequisites. So we were essentially saying, if you're trying to get LEED certified as a new construction building, you have to have an outdoor air monitor. And again, this is not final, but I would like to see, I mean, personally, I would love to see a future where all buildings are monitoring outdoor air quality at the project site, just like we do for things like temperature and humidity, right? To control our building automation systems. But again, like right now, it feels like that's a pretty big disconnect from what most projects do. So that's why we talked about moving it into a credit to make it more of an incentive or an idea to consider instead of a hard line requirement.
Yeah, that makes sense. And for another day, Sarah, I'd love to have a conversation about. I know you mentioned the sort of requirements around accuracy and the reset grading of outdoor monitors, et cetera. I've got a lot of thoughts on that, so we can have
All
another
right.
conversation offline one day.
I'll look forward to it. Yeah, for sure.
Um, there's one here. I realize that the #1 priority is occupant health, but is LEED also addressing worker health during the manufacturing process outside of EPD, HPD?
Yeah. Yes. I mean, I can say, and this is where this rating system development and language creation and all these considerations, it really takes like hundreds of people. I know there have been discussions on that. I don't think I can speak to a high level of certainty or like technicality on what that is, but the whole like circular economy and health of workers during manufacturing and how do we incentivize change in the world is definitely something that some of these working groups and under the materials category they're thinking about and talking about. But I don't have a great answer to that. But yes, it's something on the development pipeline. I don't know how it's going to manifest yet, so this is one of those things to keep an eye on.
Yeah. Okay. I think we'll take the last one here because we're probably gonna end this 10 minutes over time. So a big thank you to those that have been able to stay around. This is, I think, a really great question. And by the way, for any questions that were unanswered, we'll also take these down and we can try to reach out to people afterwards with answers offline. But here, and I had the same question actually. Wouldn't a building be required to continuously monitor and stay within range to keep their certification? So I guess this is one that I wonder about as well, because with WELL, you've got sort of your annual recertification, which WELL has also been sort of moving towards saying, if you're measuring an IAQ at the end of the year, give me the past 12 months worth of data. Reset is obviously a continuous ongoing, where if at any point, really the plaque on the wall says that I know that right now, or at least in the past 3 months, the error is acceptable. How does LEED look at that?
Yeah, I mean, right now, I'll speak to what we have right now, which is I know we have with clients ongoing conversations about like the duration, like how long is my certification good for LEED, right? And I'll use Energy Star as a parallel. Even even Energy Star, you get an Energy Star certification, you get the plaque, used to be a plaque, now it's a decal. You put the decal out there, and as long as you're, if you're updating the year, people could know it's an annual thing, but people might not know it's an annual thing. So with LEED, similarly, there's not really right now great clarity on how long that new construction or even existing building certification is good for, and what is the renewal cycle. The general guidance that we give people now is it's like 2 or 3 or maybe 5 years for new construction. But I can say with certainty that we do talk about this a lot on the LEED steering committee and on the tags. And like, what does it mean to be LEED certified? What do we want it to mean to be LEED certified? And how do you prove it to have continuous ongoing certification in a way that it gives occupants a level of confidence in your building? So all of that is to say there are a variety of opinions on this topic, and I think we want to be really progressive. We want buildings to perform well in continuity and not just in design intent, right? But with actual performance. And this is again a step to get us closer to that. But right now it's not to say like if your air quality drops below some performance threshold on a given day, you're at risk of losing your certification. That's just not really the world that we live in currently.
Got it. All right, I think on that we will wrap up. Thank you so much for going over time, everybody for staying over time. Just an FYI, Kaitera will be at ASHRAE and AHR Expo 2024 in Chicago. So hopefully looking forward to seeing some people there. Finally, massive thank you to Sarah for joining us today and walking us through all of this in so much detail. Really excited to see what the next steps are, and probably continue a lot of conversations about how to decipher and interpret the data and make the right decisions for our buildings. This is awesome. Tons of questions, so we'll try to follow up with some of those afterwards. We didn't manage to get through all of them, but big thank you to Sarah and to everybody that joined us here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and thanks I see some of my tag members are actually on the call here, and some people from Branch Pattern. So I'm sure I'll get some direct feedback that we'll be able to continue to talk about here. So this is
Amazing.
great. I appreciate it.
Yeah, this has been fun. Thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you, everyone. Have a great day.